November 2022. Somewhere in the Ural Mountains, a satellite passes over Russian territory. Feet aren't looking for military bases or missile silos. They're hunting something far stranger. A train. Just any train. A moving fortress that appears on tracking systems one moment and vanishes the next. It travels on routes that don't officially exist. It stops at stations that have been scrubbed from public maps. And according to intelligence sources, it belongs to one man, Vladimir Putin. Officially earns $140,000 a year. The leader who claims to live in a modest government apartment. The man whose declared assets wouldn't buy a decent house in most Western cities. Man is riding through the Russian wilderness in a $700 million armored train, equipped with a spa, a gym, a full medical suite, and enough security technology to rival Air Force One. Here's what makes this insane. Putin's official tax returns show his entire net worth at roughly $500,000. A decent salary for a bureaucrat, humble even, for a world leader. But investigators believe his actual fortune sits somewhere between $70 billion and $200 billion, which would make him not just rich, not just wealthy, but potentially the richest human being who has ever lived. The train is just the beginning. Behind Putin's carefully crafted image of the austere leader lies a shadow empire of palaces, superyachts, private jets, and secret bank accounts scattered across the globe. An empire hidden in plain sight. An empire protected by a network of oligarchs, childhood friends, and ex-KGB officers who hold his assets under their own names. The question isn't whether Putin is corrupt. Every serious investigator who's looked at the evidence has reached the same conclusion. The question is, how did one man steal an entire country's wealth while convincing the world he owns almost nothing? Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to follow the money. From a $1 billion palace on the Black Sea, with its own vineyard, casino, and ice rink, of yachts that would make Saudi princes jealous, to the armored ghost train that moves through Russia like a phantom, appearing and disappearing according to no schedule anyone can track. The journalists who risked their lives to expose this, some of them are dead now, in prison. The ones still free are in hiding. That haunts every investigator who's ever pulled at this thread. Where does Vladimir Putin's money actually come from? To understand that, we need to start at the beginning. Not with the train, not with the palace, with a lie. Chapter 2. The Man Who Owns Nothing. Moscow, 2012. Vladimir Putin files his annual financial disclosure. The document is remarkable for what it doesn't contain. One apartment, 77 square meters, about 830 square feet, smaller than a two-bedroom flat in most Western cities. Two Volga automobiles from the Soviet era, decades old, worth maybe $3,000 combined, a small trailer for camping trips, a bank account with roughly 3.5 million rubles, about $100,000 at the time. That's it. That's the entire declared wealth of the man running the largest country on Earth. A country sitting on $75 trillion in natural resources. A country that exports more oil than Saudi Arabia. The filing would be laughable if it weren't so insulting. Putin has been in power in one form or another since 1999. First as prime minister, then president, then prime minister again when term limits got inconvenient, then president once more. Control over a petrostate swimming in oil money. Nothing? The lie began early. When Putin first entered the Kremlin, he cultivated an image, obsessively. Judo black belt, the bare-chested horseback rider, the hockey player, simply and served Russia selflessly. State media amplified the mythology. Putin the ascetic servant. Putin who cared nothing for material wealth and everything for the motherland. A crack in the facade. In 2010, American diplomatic cables released by WikiLeaks contained a remarkable claim. An unnamed Russian source told American diplomats that Putin had accumulated vast wealth through his grip on oil and gas contracts. The source estimated his fortune at $40 billion back in 2010. The State Department didn't know if the figure was accurate. Putin's closest associates had suddenly become billionaires. Childhood friends, judo sparring partners, days in East Germany, men with no obvious business talent who now controlled empires. Unmistakable. Putin didn't need to own anything himself. His friends owned it for him. Spend years connecting these dots. His name was Alexei Navalny. a lawyer turned anti-corruption crusader who made it his life's mission to expose Putin's hidden wealth. His investigation would uncover something so obscene, excessive, that many Russians initially refused to believe it. A palace, not a mansion, a state. A palace the size of a small city, built on the Black Sea coast, features so outlandish they sounded like parody. If you're following this investigation with us, hit subscribe now. This story goes places you won't believe, and you're going to want to see every piece of evidence. The palace was just the beginning of what Navalny found. Black Sea, January 19, 2021. Alexei Navalny is sitting in a German hospital bed. From being poisoned with a Soviet-era nerve agent, someone slipped Novichok into his underwear, died on a flight from Tomsk to Moscow. Only an emergency landing and German medical intervention saved his life. He knows who ordered the hit. Everyone knows. To publish the most damaging expose in Russian political history, the video drops on YouTube. Palace, history of the world's largest bribe. Within 48 hours, it has 100 million views a week. It becomes the most watched Russian-language video in YouTube history. What it reveals is staggering. Near the resort town of Gelendzhik, on Russia's Black Sea coast, sits a compound so vast it defies comprehension. 691 square meters of living space. That's 190,000 square feet, roughly 39 times larger than the White House. The main building alone cost an estimated $1.35 billion to construct. The features read like a dictator's fever dream: an underground ice hockey rink, a theater that seats 200, a casino built to look like a Monte Carlo gambling hall, vineyards producing wine that costs $500 per bottle, a no-fly zone that extends for miles in every direction, a private port for receiving supplies by sea so no one can track what goes in or out. The bathroom fixtures alone cost more than most Russians earn in a lifetime. Italian marble everywhere, hand-painted ceilings depicting classical scenes. A 500-square-foot master bedroom suite with its own coffee bar, tasting room, overlooking the Black Sea. The property is surrounded by the largest private landholding in Russia. Vineyards, forests, and restricted military zones create a buffer that extends for miles. Aren't entirely sure what's behind the walls, they just know not to ask. Architectural blueprints, contractor invoices, and testimony from workers who'd been inside. They had drone footage, had satellite imagery showing years of construction. They had the whole thing, everything. The palace, he claimed, had nothing to do with him. It belonged to businessmen. Never visited. He didn't even know about it. But the documents told a different story. Shell companies trace back to Putin's inner circle. Construction overseen by the Federal Security Service. A property that officially belonged to no one. Just like Putin's entire fortune. The world saw the palace. What they didn't see was what else Navalny had found. The train. Chapter 4. Inside the Rolling Fortress. Here's something most people don't know about Vladimir Putin. He hates flying. Not publicly, of course. The image-conscious president has been photographed in fighter jets, bombers, even firefighting aircraft. But according to intelligence sources and leaked testimonies, Putin avoids air travel whenever possible. His preferred method of transportation? A private armored train that moves through Russia like a ghost. Investigative journalists at iStories and Medusa spent years piecing together the train's existence. What they found sounds like something from a Bond villain's wish list. The train consists of multiple specialized cars, each serving a distinct purpose. The command car features encrypted communication systems capable of reaching Russian military command from anywhere in the country. The living quarters include a full bedroom suite, study, and private bathroom with heated floors. Here's where it gets excessive. The train has a dedicated spa car, massage rooms, a sauna, a beauty salon where hairdressers and estheticians can be summoned while the train moves at 100 miles per hour through the Siberian wilderness. There's a gym car with commercial-grade equipment, car staffed with doctors and stocked with emergency surgical supplies, the capability to perform minor procedures while in motion. The security features are military-grade, that can withstand explosions. Electronic jamming equipment that blocks all signals within a certain radius. Locomotives that run ahead and behind the main train, designed to confuse anyone tracking Putin's movements. The entire system runs on dedicated tracks, that can be cleared at a moment's notice. When Putin travels, regular train service gets delayed. Stations along the route are swept by security teams hours in advance. And here's the kicker. There's not just one train, 3, each capable of operating independently. This way, actually on, sometimes all 3 move simultaneously on different routes at $700 million. But the true figure could be higher, millions annually. Putin's declared income wouldn't cover the fuel costs, land transportation. For water, he has something equally absurd than you thought. Smash that subscribe button. We're about to go hunting for Putin's yacht fleet. What investigators found will make the train look modest. Chapter 5. The Yacht Fleet, August 2022. A satellite image captures a vessel anchored off the Italian coast. The yacht is massive, 459 feet long, with a price tag estimated at $700 million. Its name is Scheherazade. Belongs to a shell company registered in the Marshall Islands. Company in the British Virgin Islands. That company is owned by yet another company in Cyprus. The ownership structure is a nesting doll of secrecy designed for one purpose: to hide the true owner. But Italian authorities have a lead when they board the vessel. Unusual. The crew, nearly 40 people, are almost entirely Russian. Many have ties to Russian government security services. One crew member's phone contains contact information for Putin's personal security detail. Mind-bending. 2 helicopter pads. A swimming pool that converts into a dance floor. A movie theater. A spa rivaling any 5-star resort. Gold fixtures throughout. Art collection worth tens of millions. Italian investigators freeze the vessel. They believe it belongs to Putin. But Scheherazade isn't alone. Investigative journalists have linked Putin to at least 5 superyachts over the years. The Graceful, a $100 million vessel that mysteriously left a German shipyard and fled to Russian waters just days before sanctions hit in 2022. The Olympia, allegedly used by Putin for Black Sea vacations, smaller vessels that ferry guests to and from larger yachts, keeping Putin's name off passenger manifests. The yachts don't belong to Putin officially. They belong to his friends, his allies, his oligarchs. The same pattern that appears everywhere investigators look. One name keeps appearing: Gennady Timchenko, a billionaire oil trader who just happens to be Putin's childhood friend from Leningrad. Before Western sanctions froze his assets, Timchenko owned yachts, jets, and properties across Europe. Intelligence services believe he was holding them for someone else. Judo sparring partner, who became a construction billionaire overnight. And his brother Boris Kovalchuk, and half a dozen other men who went from nobodies to billionaires after Putin took power. The wealth wasn't created. It was stolen. And the method of theft? Really dark. Chapter 6, The Shadow Network. To understand how Putin became the world's richest man, you need to understand one thing. Russia isn't a country. It's a crime scene. Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The largest country on Earth had to privatize decades of state-owned assets almost overnight. Factories, oil fields, mineral deposits, railways. 70 years had to find new owners. What followed was the largest theft in human history. The men who seized these assets, the original oligarchs, became billionaires within years. They bought politicians, newspapers, television stations. They hired private armies. They killed competitors. Boris Yeltsin, Russia's first post-Soviet president, couldn't control them. He needed them for political support. So he made deals. He looked the other way. Then came Putin. The mythology says Putin tamed the oligarchs. He arrested Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the richest man in Russia, and sent him to a Siberian prison for a decade. He forced Roman Abramovich and others to pay billions in back taxes. He brought them to heel. But that's not what happened. Putin didn't destroy the oligarch system. He perfected it. He replaced the original oligarchs with his own men, loyalists who understood one rule above all others. Everything you own, you hold for the boss. The system works like this. Putin's friends receive government contracts worth billions. The system works like this. Putin's friends receive government contracts worth billions. They win auctions with no real competition. They get licenses to exploit oil fields, build pipelines, stadiums for the World Cup and Olympics. The profits are staggering. In return, they hold assets. Buy yachts that Putin uses. They build palaces where Putin stays, family vacations. None of it traces back to the president himself. The money, they hit walls. Shell companies in Cyprus, trusts in the Cayman Islands, through nominees, art purchased at auction by anonymous bidders, complex, that even the best forensic accountants can only trace fragments, got closer than anyone thought possible. We're about to meet them, to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. What these journalists discovered nearly got them killed. Chapter 7. The Oligarch Piggy Banks. Every dictator needs bankers. Them. Meet Yuri Kovalchuk. Before Putin, he was a minor physicist with a modest dacha outside Leningrad. After Putin, he's worth an estimated $7.5 billion and controls Bank Russia, sometimes called Putin's personal bank. Bank Russia handles the money that flows through Putin's network, state contracts to the bank, then outward to Putin-linked properties and purchases. Nerve center. Then there's the Rotenberg brothers, Arkady and Boris. They grew up with Putin, trained judo with him as teenagers. Today, their companies have received more state contracts than almost any other private entities in Russia. Arkady Rotenberg's construction company built the Kerch Bridge, connecting Russia to Crimea, a $3.7 billion project. His companies built infrastructure for the Sochi Olympics. His companies renovate state properties, build pipelines, and collect billions in government payments. What do the Rotenbergs own in return? Properties across Europe. Art collections. A villa in Italy that investigators believe Putin has used personally. Gennady Timchenko presents the clearest case. He co-founded Gunvor, an oil trading company that, at its peak, handled 30% of Russia's crude oil exports. Before international attention made it inconvenient, Timchenko was directly involved in transactions worth hundreds of billions. Where did those profits go? Investigators have traced Timchenko-linked companies to properties in France, Switzerland, and Finland. Yachts, private jets, a business empire that expanded precisely in lockstep with Putin's political rise. The coincidences strain credulity. These men had no particular business genius. They weren't visionary entrepreneurs. They were Putin's friends, and that was enough to make them billionaires. But the system only works if everyone stays loyal. If anyone talks, the whole structure collapses. That's why defectors are so dangerous. That's why they tend to die. One defector, however, survived long enough to talk. What he revealed confirmed everything investigators suspected and added details that even the most cynical observers found shocking. Chapter 8. The Hunt for Evidence. The journalists who investigate Putin's wealth operate under conditions most people can't imagine. Editor of iStories, one of the outlets that exposed Putin's train. Locations. They use encrypted communications for everything. Burner phones. Every story goes through legal review in multiple countries to reduce the chance of retaliation. They do this because their colleagues keep dying. Investigated Kremlin corruption was shot in her apartment building in 2006. On Putin's birthday, Boris Nemtsov, an opposition leader who was preparing a report on Russian military involvement in Ukraine, was gunned down steps from the Kremlin in 2015. Alexei Navalny, who exposed the palace, was poisoned with a military nerve agent in 2020 and later died in an Arctic prison in 2024. The pattern is unmistakable. Investigate Putin's money, and you become a target. Yet journalists continue. Teams, an organized crime and corruption reporting project. Bellingcat's open source investigators. Medusa's reporters, in exile. The Navalny Anti-Corruption Foundation, operating from Lithuania. They piece together evidence from fragments. Leaked contractor invoices for the palace. Flight records for private jets. Property registrations that accidentally reveal beneficial owners. Social media posts from workers who didn't realize what they were photographing. One investigation published by OCCRP in 2022 identified over $4.5 billion in assets linked to Putin through his close associates. The methodology was painstaking, tracing corporate registrations, cross-referencing with property records, verifying through multiple sources. And that's just what they could find. The true number is almost certainly higher. Putin has had 25 years to build his financial architecture. He has the resources of an entire intelligence service to hide transactions. He has allies in countries that ask no questions. Yet the evidence keeps emerging, because even the most sophisticated system has weak points. And the weakest point? The people who work inside it. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the viewer this channel is built for. Hit subscribe. We're approaching the most explosive revelations, including testimony from someone who was inside Putin's inner circle. Chapter 9. The Bodyguard's Betrayal. The most dangerous, Putin's security detail is drawn from the Federal Protective Service. an agency so secretive that most Russians don't know it exists. These men see everything. They know where Putin sleeps, what he eats, who visits him, and where the money goes. They're also bound by oaths that carry death sentences if broken. But in 2017, an opposition group obtained something extraordinary. This testimony from a former member of Putin's personal staff. The individual's identity was protected, but their knowledge was unmistakably authentic. They described the train in detail, its routes, its schedules, its absurd amenities. They explained how Putin's travel patterns are planned, months in advance, with multiple decoy operations running simultaneously. They confirmed that Putin rarely uses official residences, preferring private properties owned by associates. But the most damning revelations concerned money. According to this source, Putin personally directs how funds from state contracts are distributed. He decides which oligarchs receive which projects. He approves major property purchases made in others' names. The whole system runs on his explicit instruction. The source described meetings where Putin would review property plans, renovations to the palace, upgrades to the yachts, construction of new dachas. He wasn't a passive beneficiary. He was the architect. This testimony aligned with what Navalny's team had independently discovered. Architectural blueprints for the palace showed Putin's personal preferences in detail. His favorite wood finishes, his preferred layout for entertainment spaces. Details that only someone intimately involved would know. Other defectors have corroborated pieces of the picture. A former finance ministry official who fled to London described the system of donations that oligarchs make to Putin-approved projects. A former intelligence officer who defected to the West explained how FSB resources are used to protect Putin's assets. Each testimony is a fragment. Together, they form an overwhelming picture. Putin isn't just corrupt, he's running the largest kleptocracy in human history. But here's what keeps investigators awake at night. What happens when this system finally collapses? Chapter 10. The $200 billion. Ghost. February 2024. Alexei Navalny dies in a Russian Arctic penal colony. He was 47. The man who exposed Putin's palace, who survived poisoning, who voluntarily returned to Russia knowing he'd be arrested. Gone. The Kremlin claims natural causes. No one believes them. Navalny's death removes Putin's most visible critic. But it can't undo what he revealed. The evidence is now permanent. The palace videos remain online, viewed over 200 million times. The documentation of the train has been verified by multiple independent outlets. The yacht seizures in Europe have forced courts to examine ownership structures that were never meant to see daylight. As of today, conservative estimates place Putin's personal fortune at $70 billion. Some investigators believe the true figure exceeds $200 billion, which would make him wealthier than Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos combined. $200 billion, hidden in plain sight, stolen from hospitals that weren't built, from roads that weren't paved, from pensions that weren't paid, from a nation of 144 million people whose average monthly salary is $700. The ghost train still runs, the palace still stands, the yachts, the ones that weren't seized, still cruise warm waters. The oligarchs still hold assets that belong to one man, and that man still sits in the Kremlin, filing annual disclosures that list his net worth at $500,000. The lie continues because the system continues. Because the people who could expose it are dead or imprisoned or exiled. Because the money is spread across so many jurisdictions that no single country can seize it all. But here's what Putin can't escape. The record now exists. Every document Navalny's team gathered is archived in multiple countries. Every investigation by OCCRP and Medusa and iStories is preserved. Every defector testimony is on file with Western intelligence services. When the system finally breaks, and all systems eventually break, the evidence will be waiting. Putin built his fortune in shadows. He'll be remembered in the light that journalists kept shining, despite everything. If this investigation showed you something you didn't know, subscribe now. We cover the stories of people who outsmarted the system and the systems that tried to destroy them. Next, watch our video on how oligarchs move money through the West. Because Putin's fortune isn't hiding in Russia. It's hiding in London, in Miami, in Geneva, maybe even in your city. The ghost train runs through the night. But the tracks lead everywhere.